the Faster Than Light radio show.
Hi and welcome once again to the show. Thanks for joining us. Ahead of you in the next half hour is a scattered look at a very interesting list of science fiction paperbacks which go under the name of Door, an American company which has been available in Australia now for the last 12 months, although they've been going for just over 10 years in America. I'll be giving you a little bit of the background on the company, history of the man who founded it and what they're about, and what you can find on our own newsstands here in Australia a little later in the program. But first of all, some news. I was reading a rather remarkable journal. I thought it was remarkable for the title. It was called The International Bookseller, and it's coming from somewhere up in the hills of Western Australia, like Darlinghurst or somewhere. And I thought to myself, what on earth is the International Bookseller coming out of there for? Well, far be it from me to query what's happening, but a very interesting review journal it was. Some interesting political and social science material being reviewed, and in it I found some statistics on the Australian paperback trade, and I thought I would pass them on to you. Being statistics, of course, they're somewhat out of date. We're in 1983 and the industry statistics compiled are only available up until 1981. But what I found interesting was that the total yield of paperbacks in Australia is running somewhere in the order of something like 19 million copies of paperbacks being sold, giving a market value of somewhere over $100 million. So the paperback industry in Australia is really something that's worth a bit of money, and something that's worth commenting on in itself. That there are 19 million paperbacks sold every year in Australia, or more these days, I was staggered at where they're all going to. Some of you must be throwing them out, because I've never seen that many paperbacks lying around in Perth, Western Australia. Even if we had, say, a fifth of that market in Perth, well, let's say an eighth of that market, that's 2 million paperbacks or thereabouts being sold in Perth. That's an awful lot of paperbacks. No wonder there's some good money invested in the promotion of the better titles, and also author tours these days in Australia. An industry that big deserves to have someone representing it. You might be interested to know that there are over 700 people involved in the distribution of paperbacks over Australia, and that the average expenditure spent on telling you about paperbacks through the media, let alone review copies and such like that come to people like me and radio stations, is just over $1 million. Big industry with some good material. That's enough about the industry. Unless you're a sort of a crazy media buff like myself, it's as boring as tears, I suppose. Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, a very good magazine with some good material in it that's well worth reading. The latest issue, the July issue, has been received at Murdoch, and you can find it out there on the newsstands now. It's got a lovely long novelette in it by George R.R. Martin, who I reviewed one of his books on the show about a month and a half ago now and gave you some information about George. The story is titled The Monkey Treatment. Very good George R.R. Martin material, and one that I want to bring to your attention. Also in the short story section of this particular magazine, there are 5 short stories in all. There's a Ron Goulart story and a Pamela Sargent story. Both of these people I'll be mentioning a little later on in the program when we come to look at Door paperbacks and the list that they offer. The departments, as per normal, Algis Budrus is giving the book reviews, and he goes back and looks in time at books that are dealing with the world as it may well be in our future of about 100 years hence. Some very interesting titles, apocalyptic visions, if you like, of the world as we might see it. Edward Bryant's novel Cinnabar is reviewed and talked about at length, although it came out about 5 or 6 years ago now. Baird Searles is doing the film reviews, and in this case he's talking about the mess that's happened with science fiction on television in America. He only thinks it's a mess now. I mean, with the things that we've been getting, and I must admit I've been ignoring on the commercial channels here in Perth, such as Knight Rider, I'd say the science fiction state of the art in America for television has been dead and at least a mess for a long period of time. Talking of science fiction on television, you may well have caught last weekend the ABC short story and or listened to the radio serial that I was telling you about that was on Wednesday this week as well. If you missed both of those events, they were worth catching. The television episode, or the television play, I thought was much better than the radio play, but good effort there to Ken Methold in giving us at least a bit of science fiction drama on television, on radio, even if the story itself was a little bit flat and a little bit hackneyed. He had Australian society being taken over by a religious group, and it was across this religious group between Scientology, which of course has a lot of interest for science fiction fans because John Campbell and a number of other notable science fiction writers got involved in Scientology. Indeed, some would say the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, was a science fiction writer and was still writing it when he founded that particular group, but that they got incorporated in America as a religion and therefore perpetrated these ideas and still do around the world, some people regard as nothing short than amazing. And Ken Methold's taken that idea and applied it to Australian society in his radio play called The Force. I liked the play for a while, and then I felt that he was carrying the farce a little bit too far. Towards the end, when he finished with Star Wars music, I thought he'd blown any chance that I had as one listener of finding any dramatic import in what he was doing. Still, I look forward to the ABC giving us more radio drama. On a lighter note, the Gordon and Gotch paperback distributors and newsagent distributors have got out the latest issue of Comic Scene. It's number 10. It's on the newsstands now, and there's a good review, if somewhat lightweight, of The Return of the Jedi with some backup stills as well. Return of the Jedi, if you're going to the movies over this holidays, you're bound to catch the trailer. It doesn't look like getting its release until December, along with Superman 3. But if you're interested in the comic world and interested in what's happened with The Return of the Jedi in the United States, a number of spin-off comics have resulted, including a daily newspaper strip. All of that is documented in the 10th issue of Comic Scene, which is available now in the newsstands.
Hi, I'm Stephen Donaldson, and this is the Faster Than Light radio show on 6 UVS FM.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I was saying at the beginning of the show that this week we plan to look at Door paperbacks, and there are a lot of them available in Western Australia currently. Collins are distributing, that's William Collins, the distributors to the newsagents and the bookshops, and there are about 35 titles of the recent American releases available in the stores. I must give you some background on this publisher's imprint itself. You'll recognise them if you're a science fiction buyer of any regularity as being those paperbacks, those American paperbacks that always have a yellow spine, and all the edges, that is the top edge, the foredge and the bottom edge of the book, are all coloured yellow as well. This particular eye-catching device is one that's been used in the past by a number of different publishers. The English hardcover publisher Victor Gollancz springs to mind as someone who made yellow dust jackets, and with a lot of writing on them, very popular in the 30s and 40s when they launched their trade list, at the advice of Stanley Morrison, who said that yellow was the most recognisable colour on the bookshelves. Door paperbacks have taken that up, and they've always used yellow as their spine effort on all of their paperbacks. Having got them identified with their little logo DAW, SF, on all their paperbacks, you might be interested to know that the paperback list has been going 11 years now. Last year they celebrated their 10th anniversary. Door Books is nothing but science fiction. The whole list is a mixture of science fiction and fantasy, the off-branch of science fiction these days, getting into the more offbeat areas of science fiction and even giving you some horror stories as well. But Door Books is founded by Donald A. Wollheim, and thus the acronym Door. Donald A. Wollheim is someone who's been associated with science fiction over a long period of time. Born in 1914, he's an American editor and writer and a lifetime resident of New York. Don Wollheim was one of the first and most vociferous SF fans. Together with Forry Ackerman, he is perhaps the most dynamic member of the embryo fandom of the 1930s. He published innumerable fanzines, and he was co-editor of the early semi-professional magazine Fanciful Tales of Space and Time. Donald A. Wollheim became a leader of the Futurians in the late 1930s, and thus he knew people like Don Knight and Ray Bradbury and Frederick Pohl. His part in early fandom is extensively chronicled in The Immortal Storm, written by Sam Moskowitz in 1954, and The Futurians by Damien Knight in 1977. He himself published his first story, The Man from Ariel, in 1934 in an issue of Wonder Stories, but he did not begin to publish fiction with any regularity until the 1940s, by which time he'd already embarked on his major career as an editor. Donald A. Wollheim is recognised as being the first person in the science fiction area to publish an anthology, The Pocket Book of Science Fiction, which came out in 1943. He published a little later Portable Novels of Science in 1945, and from these beginnings, which themselves were trailblazing, in the early 1970s, he launched the totally science fiction list for one of the publishers, Door Books. Door Books are distributed regularly by Ballantine and are incorporated as a division of that particular company, but Donald A. Wollheim has his own staff, his own finances, and orders and runs and prints his own books, the Door Paperback Company. Well, Door Books and Door List is available, as I was saying, in Australia and has been now for about 13 or 14 months. thanks to William Collins. William Collins, I would have thought about 2 or 3 years ago, were looking quite short of science fiction material to publish, having lost to the New English Library list to Hodder and Stoughton, who bought the company in the UK, and therefore their major area of science fiction, New English Library in the English-speaking world having most of Heinlein and Frank Herbert and another number of other of the major titles and major authors, lost them to Hodder and Stoughton as distributors, and therefore they had great holes in their warehouses. These days, things are looking a little bit better for William Collins, but nevertheless, 2 years ago they weren't to know that they were to get the paperback lists that they've acquired in the last 6 or 7 months, so they looked around and found undoubtedly Door Books in the United States. The trouble with distributing an American list in Australia is that not every title from the paperback list is available for distribution in Australia. The way in which the world copyright market works, often an author sells only the American rights to a work once it's published with an American publisher and sells the British rights elsewhere. These days, it happens that the author will often sell the world rights to whatever publisher takes the book first. So we might find an English author selling world rights to an English publisher, and thus the book's only available in an English edition to the reader. Having said this, looking at Door paperbacks, it means that about half of the list only is distributed in Australia. Every month in America, Door Books is releasing 4 to 6 paperbacks, depending on where the American year is. But obviously they sell more paperbacks in the American summer, and the publishing program's a little bit heavier then. This means that of those 4 to 6 books, only 2 to 3 are available for distribution in Australia, and thus to you as readers here in Western Australia. I've been looking quite carefully at the 14 months of operation that William Collins have had so far, and I notice some interesting things. It would appear that the more recent authors that Door Books are publishing, the ones that have had a little time to grow their name as science fiction authors and editors, those books aren't being picked up for English rights, or otherwise Door Books are buying the world rights, and they're available to you as readers here in Western Australia in a Door edition. However, the more recognised writers, or the writers that have won major prizes, their works are being picked up by English publishers. The Door edition of the book is not available to you as a reader, but often the English edition will become available. And I say will become available because one of the good things about having Door Books distributed here in Australia is that about 2 months after their release in America, they are released on the newsstands here. When the rights are sold from an American publisher to an English publisher, thus not world rights are taken out by the author or the original publisher, what you find happens is there is a time lag often of up to 2 years between the American paperback edition and the English paperback edition. I say this because we have a classic case in point this particular year. The last year's Hugo-winning novel, Down Below Station by C.J. Cherryh, was a Door paperback. It would have been readily available in Australia last year when it came out in paperback. However, the English rights were sold to one paperback company, Methuen, and the book is only just coming onto the market here in Australia. In fact, it's due out later this month, and I aim to review it on the program. If, however, William Collins, or Door Books in America, had bought the world rights to Down Below Station, William Collins would have been distributing it over 12 months ago, and we, like the rest of the science fiction community, might have been able to vote on its eligibility of winning the Hugo last year. As it was, you had to go to a specialty bookstore and hunt the book out. Now, let me tell you a few things about Door List as it stands. There's a wide range of material available of the science fiction and fantasy type through Door Books. It's not all hard science fiction, far from it. It's not all fantasy, far from that. It's between that long continuum, there is something for every reader of every taste. There is the more cerebral science fiction writer amongst the Door authors. There is also those that are given over to light reading, to light writing and thus light reading, those that are interested in farce, those that are interested in giving you a good scare. I'll be mentioning some of those authors a little bit later in the program. But one of the things that sticks out about the Door list is the number of anthologies that are available through Door paperbacks. At the beginning of the year, I mentioned one of these anthology series. Isaac Asimov and Martin Greenberg have been working together doing Isaac Asimov Presents The Great SF Stories. What they've been doing is taking every year since the start of science fiction in 1938, or the great years of science fiction as they see them, and doing a year-by-year anthology of the best stories that came out, so they believe, in that particular year. Wonderful, wonderful collections if you don't have the money to acquire a pulp collection of magazines, or if you don't have the time and the energy to go and hunt down these stories where they've since been anthologised. This anthology series, now we're up to The Great SF Stories Volume 9, which came out a couple of months ago by William Collins. If you can get this series of short stories, you'll have the best of the pulp era, the best of what was called by many writers the golden age of science fiction, and you'll have some very, very good stories indeed. I reviewed Volume 3 back on the show at the beginning of the year. Since that time, Volumes 5, 6, 7, 8 and now 9 have become available via William Collins. All of them are still available at the warehouse, and so you can ask your bookseller or your newsagents to get them in for you. Let me give you an idea of the sort of people that are in these anthologies. Isaac Asimov in Volume 9, the 1947 volume, has collected a story by himself, Poul Anderson, H. Beam Piper of Little Fuzzy fame, Theodore Sturgeon, Edward Grendon, Jack Williamson, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, Eric Frank Russell, Lewis Paget, and another Sturgeon story, amongst others, in this particular volume. All told, you end up with about 12 to 13 stories, one for each month of the year, and sometimes there's a dead heat and they can't choose between them. You not only get the stories themselves, you get the background on the author, how the story came to be written, and anecdotal information coming from Isaac Asimov himself. For instance, The Hobbyist, which is the story of Eric Frank Russell collected in this particular edition of the Great SF Stories, Isaac Asimov writes, Eric Frank Russell was a very tall Briton raised in Egypt who produced a substantial body of excellent work in the science fiction field. Although his best-known book is certainly Sinister Barrier, which came out in 1933, he was one of the premier satirists in science fiction, his satire usually reflecting a good measure of cynicism. He won the Hugo Award in 1955 for his short story Alamagusa. Other excellent books include, and he lists a number of these. His definitive short story collection is The Best of Eric Frank Russell, which came out in 1978. Unfortunately, he wrote several excellent long stories which are rarely reprinted because of their length, such as The First Person Singular, which is originally included in Deep Space, a collection in 1954. One of his specialities was the depiction of alien life forms, which is well represented by Hobbyist, a story that has rightly attained the status of a minor classic of its kind. There is more, but I'll leave you to find that from the edition The Great Science Fiction Stories, Volume 9, the 1947 collection, put together by Isaac Asimov and Martin Greenberg, and one of the anthology series available on Door paperbacks. It's $5.95. At the other end of the spectrum in the anthology series are the year series that Door paperbacks have been putting together. The year's best science fiction, the Europe's best science fiction called Terra Nova, and also the year's best fantasy stories, of which the 8th volume has recently become available for $4.50 in the newsagents. Originally edited by Lynn Carter, the fantasy stories these days are edited by Arthur Sahar. Now, Arthur Sahar's collection of fantasy short stories is drawn not only from the current magazines publishing science fiction and fantasy, but also from the fanzines that publish a number of fantasy and more or less the private press publications. This particular edition includes stories by Roger Zelazny, Michael Bishop, and Lisa Tuttle, names well known to science fiction readers. But there are stories by others not so well known, Jan Yollen, Bob Layman, Gillian Fitzgerald, and Charles DeLint. Some of these people writing for the more select audience currently, but one would hope soon to become major writers. Also amongst this collection of fantasy stories are two of the major authors in the Door paperback list, Tanith Lee and C.J. Cherry. I'll return in a few minutes to talk a little bit about those authors amongst others, but how about a break? Here's some music from The Twilight Zone, the movie soundtrack. It's the song that's being played on the radio as identifying with the movie, although it's only a background piece to the first segment. If you can remember from last week, The Twilight Zone, the movie, is made up of 4 separate segments, all of which have their own unique, sort of eerie music. This is bouncy and cheerful, unlike the segment it invites you into. Here is Jennifer Warnes.
Nights are Let's just take each other the way we appear. Nights are forever when you have no one. Well, nights are forever when you're just trying to hang on. Nights are forever when you have no one. Nights are forever when you're just trying to hang on.
Jennifer Warnes from the soundtrack of Twilight Zone, the movie. An eerie little movie and a good introduction to another eerie writer. I'm talking about Tanith Lee. Termed the Princess Royal of heroic fantasy by Village Voice, Tanith Lee is one of the outstanding authors in the Door paperback list. She runs the full gamut between your Arthurian-type fantasy fiction all the way through to the macabre end, where reality is twisted and bent and a real scare is around every corner. Tanith Lee has written a number of major volumes, some of which border on even science fiction. One such is The Silver Metal Lover, which was available some months ago through Door paperbacks in Western Australia for $4.95. This is a novel about relationships, and one that's quite interesting. The Silver Metal Lover in question obviously talks to us a little of the possible robotic connection that would be in this particular novel. Well, I'll leave you to find the cover, a very interesting cover it is too, on your paperback newsagents' bookshelves, and find out what on earth the title has got to do with the cover. One of Tanith Lee's more recent books, which has been released, called Red as Blood, caught my attention, and I was willing to dip into it, if you'll pardon the expression. Its subtitle is Tales from the Sisters Grimmer, and if you'll remember the classic collection of German fairy stories that were put together by the folklorists last century, the Brothers Grimm, this is how those stories might have been if they'd been collected from people who'd really been warped in the head, if they'd been collected by women who were really the Sisters Grimmer. Tanith Lee has bent all those lovely childhood fairy stories and put rather peculiar twists on them. The title story, Red as Blood, was nominated for a Nebula when it came out in 1977, I think. These short stories have been written over a long period of time, the last 6 or 7 years, and are now collected in what can only be regarded as a really weird read. Red as Blood deals with your classic witch queen and the daughter of the king, whom she is now the mother of, the stepmother. But instead of the witch being the evil one, the daughter herself has her own peculiarities. From the story, there stood a little girl child, nearly 7 years of age. Her black hair hung to her ankles, her skin was as white as snow, her mouth was as red as blood, and she smiled with it. "Bianca," said the king, "you must love your new mother." Bianca smiled radiantly, her teeth were bright as sharp-bone needles. "Come," said the witch queen, "come, Bianca, I'll show you my magic mirror." "Please, mamma," said Bianca softly, "I do not like mirrors." "She is modest," said the king, "and delicate. She never goes out by day. The sun distresses her." That night the witch queen opened the case of her mirror. "Mirror, whom do you see?" "I see you, mistress, and all the land but one." "Mirror, mirror, who is it that you do not see?" "I do not see Bianca." And therein lies the tale of Red as Blood. Our lovely princess is none other than some little vampiric edition of your lovely, lovely standard princess. A rather shocking tale, and Tanith Lee weaves all the elements of the original fairy story and warps them with her own bizarre sense of humour. Tales by the Sisters Grimmer, as you would never expect fairy stories to be, and certainly not for children. Tanith Lee's collection of those stories, $4.50 out there on the newsstands now, entitled Red as Blood. There are other female authors in the Door collection that deserve note. C.J. Cherry is one, an outstanding author. Two books that are out there now on the shelves are The Pride of Shanur, which is in this year's Hugo lists, and I've mentioned it before on the program. I'll just mention it in passing here. And also Macanta's Luck, which is set in the same area as Down Below Station, the novel that won the Hugo last year. C.J. Cherry is continually published by Door, is one of their major authors, and I'm sure we can expect more from her in the Door list. Two more females in the list are Marion Zimmer Bradley, whose Darkover novels have all been published in Door, although unfortunately for us in the English-speaking part of the world, or in the English publishing part of the world, most of those novels are available through Arrow and are therefore somewhat time-delayed behind the American edition. Novels not set in the Darkover universe or only tangential to it are becoming available through William Collins and the newsagents. One such is the recently released Sword of Chaos, $4.50 out there on the newsstands. If you're a Marion Zimmer Bradley fan, I'll be planning on reviewing her Mists of Avalon, recently released in hardcover in about a month's time, and I'll mention some of the other paperbacks when I do that. Finally, for the women in the Door list, and there are a number of others besides the authors that I've highlighted, Jo Clayton has a number of titles. She hasn't been picked up by any of the English paperback publishers to date, and therefore all of her work is becoming available through William Collins on Door on our newsstands. A new trilogy that started, and the whole lot of it seems to be being released by William Collins through the Door imprint, is the Moongatherer, or the Diadem novels, which she started with earlier, the follow-up trilogy to that, which starts off with Moongatherer. I found Jo Clayton's writing a little bit, for me, baroque, sort of a bit too much for me to get inside of. I don't really get into her sort of fantasy, but I know that she's got a number of readers out there who really enjoyed the Diadem novels and enjoy what else she's writing. Moongatherer, the start of a new trilogy of Jo Clayton. To finish with, Door has male writers. Don't let me give you the wrong impression that everybody who writes for Door paperbacks has to be female. There are some strong male writers in the list. One who's got a number of titles to his credit is Ron Goulart, who I mentioned a little earlier in the program. One of his novels that's recently available on the newsstands is Upside Downside, and if you're unfamiliar with Ron Goulart's work, then I'd suggest that this is a good starting point. It is everything that he normally writes. Satire is his forte, he loves to send up everybody, and in this particular story, the hero is a bumbling sort of FBI, CIA type agent who has various implants to allow him to be a little superhuman, and he's fallen in love with the heiress to what is a downside, a sort of chicken hamburger fast food empire. This particular lovely lady and he have the most outlandish adventures in the most bizarre circumstances in Upside Downside by Ron Goulart. And in conclusion, let me tell you of a book that became available this month through Door paperbacks in the state, Prelude to Chaos. It's by Edward Llewellyn, an author unknown to me until this particular title, although he has a number of other books to his credit. This title mentions, on page 156, a radio interview, a radio interception where the original radio waves are coming from Wiluna in Western Australia. Any novel in any paperback imprint that mentions Western Australia is worth having a read just to find out how the hell they got to know about us in the first place. Edward Llewellyn, Prelude to Chaos, $4.95. It too is available in the newsstands. That's me for this week. Next week I'm going to be returning with, well, at least some information on the other films that are available for the holidays and more. Catch you then. Bye for now.
Big wonderful galaxy. Starship, could take us away.